can somebody help me answer a question real quick? It won't take up much of your time, but I just gotta ask, what the hell even is a Vectorman anyway?
Bruh.
Damn,
Oh my god!
No, seriously, is he Vector? Is he man? Can he give me COVID? Do I need to flee the country, guys? I'm honestly wigged out. Welcome to 30 for 30. I'm your host, Aiden of Blue Couch Productions, and on this show, I'm attempting to review 30 games in 30 days. For more on the show's concept, be sure to watch the Altered Beast episode before this one, and then come on back. And yeah, look, it's the first video in the new house. I honestly really like this room a lot, although I'm still trying to figure out how I want the setup to look, so if it looks weird to you, it'll be improved in later videos, I promise. But anyway, enough about me. What are we actually talking about today on 30 for 30? Well, I thought it'd be interesting to review not one game, but two of them. And why not have them face off against each other in a versus battle of sorts? So, that's what we'll do. We're going to be reviewing Vectorman 1, Vectorman 2, and seeing which game comes out on top. But it's not really a good fight if you don't know who the contenders are, so we kind of have to answer that question that I asked at the beginning of the video. What even is a Vectorman to begin with? Well, I'm glad you asked. The answer is actually surprisingly simple. Vectorman is a man made up of vectors. Shocking, I know, especially for the 90s. You see, back in the 16-bit era, games were primarily 2D, but we were all wondering what the future might hold in a 3D age, what new game experiences we might be able to enjoy. Unfortunately, the hardware just wasn't there yet. But that didn't stop companies like Nintendo and Rare from giving us a sneak peek as to what that might look like. Nintendo tried it with Star Fox and F-Zero, and Rare went a step further with Donkey Kong Country. This game actually used 3D models for the characters and then turned those models into sprites to put into the game. It was a cool effect, everybody really liked it, but I guess more importantly, it made Nintendo a lot of money, and in consumers' minds, it made it look like the more powerful console. After all, Sega couldn't do anything like a Donkey Kong Country of sorts. That hardware was just too outdated. Well, Sega looked to prove those people wrong. Enter Blue Sky Software. They were the developers behind, guess what? The Vectorman games, and they had some tech behind them for sure. Vectorman uses 23 different vectors, turns those into sprites, and then moves all those sprites in unison to make it look like an actual character, which is a pretty interesting effect to say the least, and critics bought onto it. They praised the game for all the technical achievements. They said the gameplay was fun too. It got 7s and 8s across the board. Heck, even Electronic Gaming Monthly gave Vectorman 2 the Genesis Game of the Year. But I'm guessing you've probably never heard of Vectorman outside of this video unless you're like a hardcore Sega fan, and there's a reason for that. The character just didn't catch on. But why did that happen? Well, I'm gonna pin it on the release dates. These came out super late in the Sega Genesis lifespan. I'm talking 1995-96 late. At that point, 3D was already here. The PS1, the N64, the Sega Saturn, they were out and doing amazing things. So it made very little sense to go back to the 16-bit console to play a pseudo 3D game like Vectorman when the real deal was just down the street. Did he truly deserve to be forgotten like that? I would argue no. Both of these games are super fantastic in their own right. And so I'm hoping that this Versus shows you guys what you were missing out on and hopefully convinces enough people to give these games a try. But with all that preamble and stuff out of the way, let the battle begin. The Vectorman games are a forgotten relic of the 16-bit era, but that doesn't mean they aren't super fun to play. Now, granted, I didn't have that impression when I first played these games. I thought they were confusing, didn't make much sense, and I was beyond frustrated. Thankfully though, like many games on 30 for 30, it was giving the game a second chance that really opened my mind up and allowed me to discover that these games are actually pretty damn good. Now sure, the run and gun platformer is a common genre, even for the time, but you'll be hard-pressed to find one that controls this darn well. Vectorman isn't the fastest thing alive, he's actually pretty slow, but there's a trade-off, he gets a ton of utility. He can shoot in multiple directions, he has a double jump with a ton of vertical momentum, and he can even shoot downwards to slow his descent to the ground. You won't know about all this tech starting out, but it's a joy to discover, learn, and apply it in all sorts of key scenarios. Vectorman gives you a ton of options based on how you want to play the game, and it makes it feel like a joy to play through, like it's not a chore at all. This same philosophy can also be said for its level design. It's sprawling with multiple paths to explore. The game even encourages this exploration by hiding really good power-ups in the more obscure spots. You can find anything from a spread shot to take down more enemies, or health and extra lives so you can take more hits. It just depends on whether or not you're willing to look outside the box and shoot at just the right TV sets. But let's say you don't want to explore. Let's say you just want to breeze through the game and try to get through it as quickly as possible. Well, that playstyle works as well. If you know what you're doing, most stages only take a few minutes. You can breeze through it and move on to your heart's content. It's honestly the best of both worlds. Whether you're the type of player who wants to explore or the type of player that wants to move on, Vectorman accommodates you, and I just don't see a ton of level design that's this nuanced and accommodates both camps. It's awesome. That being said though, Vectorman 1 is still very much a game from the early 90s, and it does have occasional issues for sure. My least favorite parts of the game are these variety levels that change up the gameplay style on you. There's this one where you're a twister and you're trying to shoot a laser through a hole, and it's like, what does this have to do with the core run and gun platforming? Turns out, not much at all. These stages solely exist to confuse you, drain lives, and they feel like a totally cheap tactic that just doesn't mesh well with the core overall experience. Thankfully, they're not terribly plentiful, but still, it does annoy me a little bit. Outside of that though, I'd say the pacing is a bit weird, like some level themes repeat multiple times, which that can get kind of annoying. But those are my only major nitpicks and weaknesses. I think the level design is super solid, the controls are polished, and I enjoyed my playthrough of Vectorman 1 to the point where it did really impress me. I give this game 4 out of 5 stars, and I'd recommend that you play it as well. It's a hidden gem for the Sega Genesis. With Vectorman 1 being as good as it was, it honestly left Vectorman 2 with a lot more pressure and a higher set of expectations for me. I was a fan now, and I wanted to see Vectorman 2 improve upon the classic formula that I love so much. What I ended up getting though was a completely different thing. Vectorman 2 is a game with a different set of strengths and weaknesses. It's its own unique Vectorman flavor. So I just had to kind of take it for what it actually is and not what I wanted it to be. Did it succeed? Was it unique enough? Did I prefer this take on Vectorman? Or is it not as good as the first game? Well, let's find out, and hopefully by the end of the review we can declare a winner in this battle of the Vectorman games. Let's start off though with the things that Vectorman 2 does better than the original. The first thing I want to note is the improved visual presentation. The stages to me have a more distinct visual variety than the first game, and they do a better job at flowing into each other. We start off in a bug-infested swamp with dark, dim, moody lighting, then transition into a volcano with bombastic explosions and fire effects. While these are common themes in most platforming games, it's the level of added detail that helps it stand out. The lighting is super impressive, the effects add to the atmosphere, and I think they really nail that future Earth aesthetic that the first game was trying so hard to achieve. Another major improvement that Vectorman 2 has is in its power-ups. I talked about how in Vectorman 1 you can get a spread shot and different types of guns, and while Vectorman 2 does still have those, they also add these new animal transformations, and I really like these. Vectorman can transform into a scorpion for added range or a rhino for a charge attack. They also give you invincibility to common stage hazards like lava, which is super dope. My only complaint with them is that they don't last terribly long. We're talking about 30 seconds here and they're done, but hey, that's a nitpick at best. I still enjoyed them far more than any power-up in Vectorman 1. Speaking of which, what does Vectorman 1 do better than the sequel? I'd say its level design is a lot stronger. Vectorman 2, for whatever reason, have stages that are either far too long or super short. They just don't mesh well together. You either have stages that are the classic Vectorman platforming that are just elongated out to a miserable degree, or stages that try out a new mechanic, like the skating levels for example, that just don't have enough time to leave an accurate impression on you. Yes, they still are big and they have multiple paths to explore, but Vectorman 2 just doesn't match that balance that I loved so much in the first game. I also don't think the soundtrack is as good in Vectorman 2. Like, I couldn't remember a single track in this game as compared to the first one, but I guess most players probably won't end up caring about that as much as I do personally. But those are the different set of strengths and weaknesses. There are similarities between the two games, like how the story is very lackluster, and the rock-solid controls thankfully do transfer over. But with all that being said, which game do I think is personally better? Honestly, it depends a good bit on the player, but I think for me personally, Vectorman 1 just edges it out, and it really does come down to that level design. Because I'm gonna be honest, I'm not super invested in the character of Vectorman and his world. I think they can even be boring and cliche at points. What really ended up making me attracted to these games in the first place was that rock-solid level design. And when you take that away, it's just not as good of a game as I would like it to be. Sure, the visual presentation is better and the power-ups are cool, but none of that matters if I'm not enjoying the stage-to-stage experience. I think Vectorman 1 ends up winning this battle, and as far as Vectorman 2 is concerned, it's just a lesser experience overall, while still being a fairly good game on its own. My final rating for it is 3.5 out of 5 stars. Go ahead and play Vectorman 2, it's still a fun experience, just not as good as the first game. Well, that'll do it for this battle of the Vectorman games. And hey, even though Vectorman 1 is my personal favorite, 2 absolutely put up a good fight. I still think it's a worthwhile game, just not as good as the first one, in my opinion. But hey, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys thought of this video down in the comments below. And hey, if you've played one of these games before, let me know about why I'm legitimately wrong and how every point I brought up was heresy. I'd love to read it down below. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe. And hey, feel free to hit that notification bell, as we're going to be taking a look at some of the final Sega Genesis games I'm covering for 30 for 30. But that'll do it for me, everybody. Hope you guys had a fun time. I'm Aiden of Blue Couch Productions, and I'm signing off. Bye-bye.